On my anniversary, my mom gifted me a plane ticket and told me to fly to a special surprise. The flight attendant said, "You're on the cleaning crew manifest." I laughed, that can't be right. Hours later, I was handed a mop while my mom hosted a lavish party on the same plane. Now, her friends know what she did, and they've abandoned her. I wish I could say this was just some mix-up. Some weird clerical error that turned into an awkward family story we'd laugh about years later. But it wasn't. From the moment the invitation came, something felt off. Beverly doesn't give things. She performs. There's always an angle, a subtext. Still, against Armin's better judgment and mine, I packed a carry-on bag and went to the airport alone, telling myself this could be her version of reconciliation. I should have known better. At the gate, everything looked normal until the agent scanned my boarding pass and frowned. She pulled up a second screen, looked at me a bit too long, then quietly said, "Hold on just a moment." A few minutes later, a supervisor approached. He looked at my ticket and said, "This flight is chartered. You're on the Manifest Underground Services cleaning crew." I blinked. That must be a mistake. My mother booked the ticket for me. I'm supposed to be a passenger. He hesitated. "We've got you logged under support staff. It's possible she listed you under the company handling service logistics for this flight." They handed me a uniform shirt, a gray polo with a stitched badge that said support crew. I remember just standing there, holding it, confused, cold, and deeply embarrassed. My hands were shaking, but I didn't know what else to do. I hadn't checked any luggage. I didn't even have a proper jacket. I told myself I'd just get on the plane and straighten it out with her in person. That was my second mistake. When I stepped on board, I could smell the champagne before I saw her. It was like something out of a luxury lifestyle magazine. White leather seats. Velvet pillows. A string quartet in one corner. Crystal glasses clinking, soft laughter, perfume clouding the air like fog. And there she was. Beverly. Dressed in a cream silk suit, her blonde hair styled like an old Hollywood actress. Surrounded by a group of impeccably dressed women all her age or slightly younger, all dripping in diamonds and disdain. She saw me immediately. I know she did. Her eyes lingered for a second, just long enough for the corners of her mouth to twitch in a tight little smirk. Then she looked away. Like I was invisible. One of her friends, a tall woman with red nails and a fake British accent, laughed and said, "Darling, the staff looks so young these days." My mother giggled. "Yes, doesn't she look eager to please?" That was when I knew. This wasn't an accident. This was calculated. I couldn't even speak. Couldn't move. One of the flight attendants came over, handed me a tray of hors d'oeuvres, and gestured toward the back of the plane. "We're short-staffed today. Can you help serve in the lounge area?" I nodded. Because what else do you do when the person who raised you decides to use you as a prop? So I served. I passed out drinks. I wiped down the counters. I smiled at women who didn't look me in the eye. Every so often, I'd catch a glimpse of my mother, holding court in the center of the lounge. Laughing, gesturing with her champagne flute, casually slipping in humble brags about her daughter's second marriage and how she hoped this one lasts. And I wanted to scream. But instead, I cleaned. I wiped lipstick smudges off glass and listened to women talk about Pilates instructors and personal chefs. I nodded when they asked for lemon with their tea. I tucked my hair behind my ears and kept my head down like a paid staff member. At one point, I caught my reflection in a window and barely recognized myself. Not because of the uniform, but because of the look in my eyes, that old, hollow ache of a daughter trying to make sense of a mother who sees love as leverage. When we landed in Charleston, she didn't say a word to me. She got into a black SUV with her friends and told the coordinator to arrange a room for me with the rest of the crew. I stayed in a small service apartment with the charter staff while she and her guests were taken to a luxury villa on Sullivan's Island. The next morning, during a private brunch, I finally confronted her. She was seated at the head of a long table, sipping espresso like a queen holding court. Her friends buzzed around her, but the mood was slightly different. Some of them looked confused, unsure of how to treat me. Maybe someone had whispered what was going on. I sat down across from her. No smile. No pretense. What was the point of that? I asked. She blinked. Slowly. Then set her cup down and crossed her arms. Of what? Putting me on the manifest as staff. Making me work that flight. She gave a dry laugh. Oh, Clarissa. You've always had such a flair for victimhood. I'm not being a victim. I want to know why you did it. She shrugged. I thought you could use a little humility. You've always acted like you're above it all, with your charity jobs and your simple life. Maybe now you'll see what hard work really looks like. You don't think I know hard work? My voice cracked. I raised a child alone while rebuilding my life after divorce. I work 60-hour weeks helping struggling families. And you think wiping down private jets is a lesson I needed? She stared at me. Cool. Detached. Don't be so dramatic. It was a joke. But it wasn't. It was a message. You'll never be above me. And for the first time, I didn't cry. I didn't yell. I didn't shrink. I just stood up and walked away, not just from the table, but from whatever relationship I thought I still had with her. What she didn't realize was that her performance didn't go unnoticed. Her friends saw. Some of them stayed quiet out of loyalty. But others? They started to question her. Ask questions. Send me messages. Little apologies. Soft admissions. And that's when I realized I didn't need to get even. I just needed to tell the truth. After that brunch, everything felt quieter. Not because the noise had stopped, but because I'd tuned it out. I spent the next 2 days in Charleston avoiding my mother and her guests. I stayed in the small apartment the staff used, surrounded by cleaning supplies, crew uniforms, and chipped mugs that still somehow felt warmer than the gilded wine glasses upstairs. I didn't call Armand. I didn't want to talk to Mira. I wasn't ready to say out loud what had happened, because speaking it would make it real. And some part of me, some embarrassingly childish part, still clung to the hope that she'd call. That she'd say it had gone too far. That she hadn't meant for it to be this cruel. But she didn't call. She didn't check in. Not once. Instead, I saw Instagram posts. Her friends tag her at cocktail bars and historic mansion tours. Her wearing a wide-brimmed hat and posing beside a fountain, captioned with something about Southern charm and wonderful company. I wasn't in a single photo. But one of the staff was. A young girl named Kaylee, just out of college, working flights to pay off her student loans. She had snapped a behind-the-scenes photo of the brunch buffet on her private story, which someone screenshot and shared with me. In the background, you could see me. In uniform. Hair tied back. Clearing plates. That was when it hit me, my mother hadn't just embarrassed me. She'd erased me. She invited me on this trip to humiliate me and then went to lengths to pretend I'd never even been there. And yet, the idea of going home and pretending none of it happened felt worse. I had to do something. So I started small. I approached one of the women who had been at the brunch, a woman named Darlene. I remembered her from my childhood. She used to give me fruit leather during boring dinner parties and tell me stories about her dachshund named Clementine. She didn't look like someone who wanted to hurt me. She looked like someone who'd been pulled along for the ride. I found her sitting on the porch of the villa the next morning. Alone, drinking coffee. I walked up slowly, unsure of how she'd react. When she saw me, she didn't smile. But she didn't look away either. I just want to ask you something, I said gently. And you don't have to answer if you don't want to. She nodded. Did you know what she planned for me before we boarded the plane? She looked down at her coffee, stirred it with a tiny silver spoon, and said, not exactly. She said she had something ironic planned. But she made it sound like a joke. A performance. Would you have come if you knew? She didn't answer right away. Then she whispered, no, that was all I needed. Because it meant I wasn't crazy. I wasn't being overly sensitive or making mountains out of molehills. Someone else saw it. A real, human moment of acknowledgement. That alone lit a match inside me. Over the next day, 2 more women approached me quietly. One slipped me a handwritten note under the apartment door. Another asked to meet me near the side patio while Beverly was upstairs refreshing her makeup. Each had a variation of the same story about how Beverly had manipulated, embarrassed, or intimidated them over the years. Sometimes in subtle ways, sometimes outright. None of them wanted drama. But all of them were tired. Tired of playing along. Tired of watching someone use charm and money as weapons. That evening, I boarded the return flight in silence. I wore the uniform again. Not because I had to, but because I wanted her to see me in it. My mother didn't say a word during boarding. Didn't even look my way. But her friends? They did. And the energy on that plane had shifted. No more clinking glasses. No more laughing. Just murmurs. Side glances. Silence. Midway through the flight, I stepped into the galley and saw Beverly talking to one of the women, a woman named Rena. She'd been her closest friend for over 20 years. But now, Rena was sitting with her arms crossed, her body turned slightly away. Cold. Distant. And Beverly noticed. That was the beginning. She turned to look at me then. Eyes narrowing. Studying me like she was trying to solve a puzzle that no longer obeyed her rules. I looked right back at her. And smiled. Because that was the moment she realized something had shifted. She wasn't untouchable anymore. By the time the plane landed back in Milwaukee, the party was officially over. No one cheered. No one toasted. No one clapped for Beverly like they used to. They just quietly gathered their designer handbags and wheeled suitcases, offered each other tight smiles, and stepped off the jet like the spell had worn off. Something unspoken had passed through that cabin at 40,000 feet, and it wasn't just altitude. Beverly didn't speak to me at the airport. She disembarked quickly, trailing behind 2 women who suddenly didn't wait for her. She didn't say goodbye, didn't offer a ride, didn't even do her signature air kiss gesture. I stood on the tarmac in that gray uniform, my carry-on slung over one shoulder, watching her disappear through the automatic glass doors like she was late for something more important. I went home and didn't unpack. I sat on the couch, still in uniform, and finally told Armand everything. To his credit, he didn't interrupt. He didn't try to soothe it away with phrases like she didn't mean it or maybe she'll come around. He just listened. And when I was done, he put his arm around my shoulder and said, "You deserve to be seen. Not tolerated. Not managed. Seen." I cried harder than I expected. The next day, I started writing. Not out of revenge, not at first. Just out of grief. Grief for the mother I'd never had. For the birthdays I spent waiting for her to look up from her phone. For the wedding she skipped. For the part of me that still wanted her approval, even after everything. I wrote down everything from the call where she offered the surprise to the moment I realized she planned it all. I documented the names of the women on the flight, their reactions, the conversations I had with them after. I attached screenshots of messages. The crew manifest. The photo Kaylee had shared. I even included a photo of the gray polo shirt folded on my bed like a ghost of what should have been a celebration. Then I submitted it to a popular relationships advice blog I'd been following for years anonymously. It went viral in 3 days. The post didn't name names. It didn't need to. But people connected the dots. Women in Milwaukee's social circle started whispering. Then talking. Then texting each other screenshots. I didn't hear from my mother for 3 weeks. But I heard about her. One of her oldest friends, a woman named Gloria, quietly removed her from the garden club's email list. Another woman stepped down from a charity board they co-chaired and listed personal misalignment of values as the reason. And then Rena, the closest one, posted a photo of herself at a local event. Without Beverly. She captioned it, "Surround yourself with women who build each other up. Not tear you down." It wasn't subtle. And Beverly saw it. She finally called. Late one Thursday night, just after I'd come home from a food pantry drive. Her number lit up on my phone and for a second, I stared at it, debating whether to answer. But I was done hiding from her voice. I picked it up. Her tone was clipped, breathless, furious. The voice of someone whose world had started to unravel and didn't know which thread had done it. "You've been talking," she said. "I've been telling the truth," I replied. "You've humiliated me," she snapped. I didn't argue. I let the silence answer for me. After a long pause, she said, "You're ruining my relationships." "No," I said calmly. "You did that. I just stopped covering for you." She scoffed, but it wasn't convincing. "Those women are jealous. They've always wanted to bring me down. You handed them the excuse." There it was. Still incapable of reflection. Still blaming everyone but herself. Still playing the victim. "You don't get it, do you?" I said softly. "All I wanted was for you to treat me like your daughter, not your project. Not your embarrassment. But you couldn't even let me have my anniversary without turning it into a stunt." "I gave you an experience," she said coldly. "One you clearly took advantage of. That broke something in me." "You gave me a mop," I said. "On the day my husband and I were supposed to be celebrating the life we're building. You turned it into a lesson. But you were the one who ended up learning something. People finally saw who you are not because I told them, but because they witnessed it." There was a long pause. And then she said, with no trace of irony, "You're ungrateful." I hung up. That was the last time I picked up her call. But the fallout kept going. Over the next few months, it was like watching a chandelier fall in slow motion. Beverly didn't implode overnight. That's not how people like her unravel. No, it was much more elegant than that: social erosion, piece by piece. Invitations stopped coming. Doors quietly closed. The look she used to command in every room, admiration, envy, started shifting into something colder. Wary. Measured. I didn't rub it in. I didn't post about it. I didn't send her any "I told you so" messages. I didn't need to. The truth had done its work. I went back to my life. The real one, the one that existed beyond jet lounges and curated brunches. I dove back into my nonprofit work, helped organize a school fundraiser for Myra's robotics team, and finally booked the weekend getaway Armand and I had postponed after her surprise trip. We went to Door County. Just the two of us. No drama. No manipulation. Just time. Real, beautiful time. It was there, in a small waterfront cabin with a wood-burning stove and a window that looked out over the lake, that I opened my laptop and checked the inbox tied to the anonymous blog submission. There were over 300 messages. Some were just kind words from strangers who saw their own mothers, sisters, or friends in the story. Others were from women in my city who pieced things together and wanted to say they stood with me. But a few stood out the most. They were from people who knew Beverly. And they weren't angry with me. They were grateful. One woman, a former housekeeper who worked for her 10 years ago, wrote, "I never told anyone the way she treated me. Thank you for saying it out loud." Another, a younger woman who had been engaged to one of Beverly's cousin's sons, told me how Beverly tried to advise her to leave him for someone with a stronger financial portfolio. She wrote, "She thought she was helping, but it always felt like she was trying to fix me into someone she could control." That one hit home. Because for most of my life, I thought maybe I was broken. Too sensitive. Too eager to be accepted. Too emotional. And maybe if I could just act right, do right, smile the right way, I'd finally be let in. I'd finally had enough. But reading those stories, I realized it wasn't about me. It was about her. And it always had been. One Saturday morning, as I was cleaning out the garage, I came across a box labeled Mom Keepsakes. It was full of the kinds of things that used to feel like anchors: childhood birthday cards, a pressed corsage from a cotillion I hated, photos of her and me at some long-forgotten luncheon where we were both smiling but not at each other. I didn't throw it out. I just closed the lid and pushed it to the back. Not because I wanted to preserve the illusion, but because I needed to remember that she was never who I hoped she'd become. Around that same time, Rena reached out. Not with a dramatic apology or a formal invitation. Just a message: I'd like to grab coffee. I'd like to talk to a woman, not from one of Beverly's soldiers. We met at a quiet cafe in town. She looked different outside of Beverly's orbit, softer, more human. We talked for hours. She told me that when the story came out, she was stunned. Not because she didn't believe it, but because it confirmed something she'd quietly suspected for years. She admitted Beverly had tried to turn her against people, especially me, more than once. I was afraid to challenge her, she said. We all were, in different ways. I told her I didn't need her to apologize for staying quiet. I understood. I'd done it too. By the end of that coffee, we weren't friends. Not yet. But we were something else: honest. And in that, there was more potential than I'd felt in a long time. Then came the final blow, not to me, but to Beverly. A charity board she'd chaired for nearly a decade voted to replace her. It was done politely, with thank you emails and a tasteful announcement in the newsletter. But everyone knew what it meant. Beverly's influence was waning. The woman who once controlled rooms with just a look was now being gently moved aside. And for the first time, she was forced to sit with herself. I don't know if she's reflecting. I don't know if she's sorry. I'm not waiting to find out. Because my life is moving forward, freely. One morning, while Mira was getting ready for school, she popped into the kitchen and said, "Hey Mom. Grandma messaged me on Instagram." I tensed, bracing. She just sent a heart emoji. No words. Just that. I nodded. You don't have to respond. That's up to you. Mira looked thoughtful. I think I'll just leave it. I smiled. That's okay. Because that's how cycles end. Not always in flames, but with clear, quiet choices. One heart emoji left unanswered. One mother no longer chasing crumbs. One daughter is learning how to take up space in her own story. Life moved on, not dramatically, not in some sweeping cinematic way, but in the slow, steady rhythm of healing. The more distance I had from Beverly, the easier it became to see the truth: I wasn't broken. I was just raised by someone who saw love as a transaction and respect as something to be withheld for leverage. And once I stopped trying to earn what should have been freely given, my entire world shifted. I went back to therapy. Not because I was falling apart, but because I wanted to build better. Stronger. I started focusing on boundaries, not just the kind I mumbled in frustration and then ignored out of guilt. Armand and I grew closer. There was something about him witnessing what I went through, not fixing it, just holding space for it, that changed our marriage in the best way. He never said, "I told you so." He just loved me with the quiet steadiness I didn't know I could trust until everything else fell apart. And Mira? She watched everything unfold with more maturity than I could have hoped for. She saw the patterns. Saw me walk away with dignity. She never once asked me to make up with Beverly. She understood, instinctively, what I had only learned through years of emotional bruising: that not all family deserves a front row seat in your life. A few months after everything, Mira and I were at a farmer's market on a sunny Saturday morning when we ran into one of Beverly's former friends, Darlene, the one who'd stirred her coffee quietly while I asked for the truth. She smiled and said hello. Asked how school was going for Mira, and how the nonprofit was handling the new grant. She didn't mention Beverly. Not once. But as we turned to walk away, she touched my arm gently and said, "Some people spend their whole lives trying to control how they're remembered. But we get to decide how we live. And that's more powerful." I don't know if she meant to leave me with that thought. But I carried it home like a treasure. Because that was the revenge. Not some public takedown. Not a confrontation that left us both bleeding. Just this: I didn't let her define me. And when she tried to humiliate me, she ended up exposing herself. Her friends left her not because I asked them to, but because when people see the truth clearly, they move accordingly. No theatrics. No violence. Just gravity. Eventually, Beverly tried to reach out again. An email. A few text messages. An envelope in the mail with a vague apology written in her impossibly neat cursive. I didn't respond. Not because I'm cruel. But because some bridges are better left burned. Not out of anger but for warmth. Now, every year on my anniversary, Armand and I book a trip. Nothing fancy. Nothing performative. Sometimes it's just a quiet cabin in the woods or a last-minute road trip with no reservations. This year, we're going back to Charleston. We'll fly coach. Together. Holding hands. And I'll walk past every woman in first class with my head held high, knowing I didn't need champagne or silk to feel worthy. I just needed to stop asking for love from someone who didn't know how to give it. And now? Now I know what love actually looks like. It looks like my daughter, throwing her arms around me after a long day. It looks like Armand, setting my coffee down exactly the way I like it. It looks like me in the mirror, no longer trying to fit into someone else's version of who I should be. Just me. Finally, free.